from prodigious healing magic to superhuman strength to even changing the weather, plus the ability to wield the terribly powerful hero's relics. It's unsurprising that crests, bloodline traits considered gifts from the goddess, would be so treasured in Fodlan. But, as shown by several Garreg Mach students, all that glitters isn't gold. This is very much the case for Marianne. Our first glance of Marianne speaks volumes. The sallow eyes, hunched shoulders, messy bangs, and that vaguely despairing expression. This is the face of someone going through it. To understand what it is, let's first discuss her background. The daughter of an unnamed noble, Marianne's parents mysteriously disappeared when she was 14, after which she was adopted by the Margrave Edmund of the Leicester Alliance. The cause of their disappearance is unknown, but Marianne believes it's because of her crest, and naturally grew to hate it. When she enrolled in Garreg Mach, her adoptive father paid the monastery a large sum to keep her crest a secret, as Marianne does herself, though she is still found out by some. This puts Marianne in stark contrast to most of Fodlan society, which sees crests as symbols of lineage, power, and a free ticket into its upper echelons. In her eyes, Marianne lives with a terrible burden, one that crushes the joy in her heart and threatens to destroy her completely each and every day. To cope, she does what many do in their times of strife. She turns to her religion. Marianne's a fascinating take on the pious cleric archetype Fire Emblem so fond of, combining those typical concepts with themes of emotional illness. Her personal journey depicts many of the day-to-day ramifications of depression and anxiety, while her desperate leaning on her piety to deal with her depression makes her a lens into what faith truly means, the forms it can take, and its effect on emotional well-being and development, for good or ill. And it all starts with one central conflict.
My ancestors were cursed, therefore I'm cursed!
Memes aside, this is the crux of Marianne's conflict. As mentioned before, Marianne believes her crest, known as Maurice's crest or the crest of the beast, caused her parents' disappearance. This crest has an unfortunate perception as a curse on Marianne's bloodline, as well as controlling a beast lurking deep within the forest, killing those in its wake. This even extends to rumours that bearers of the crest become violent beasts themselves at night. Marianne seems to buy into this, and while not explicitly stated in-game, it's likely her parents' disappearance is what crystallized her perception, likely as a way to rationalize it. The problem here is that this perception of her crest trickles down into her self-esteem, to the point that she hates herself as much as her crest, leaving her self-esteem in the gutter. This fog of self-hatred blinds her from acknowledging her valuable traits, such as her kindness, sensitivity, talent with magic, and almost supernatural affinity for animals. It also has her shy away from any kind of compassion, feeling undeserving of it. This toxic mindset makes her intensely pessimistic, prone to error, and religiously withdrawn, always trying to avoid conversation where she can and escape as soon as possible. Marianne starts almost every support trying to push her support partner away, generating friction between her and them. In her sea support with Lysithea, she fails to help Lysithea deal with a medical emergency at the training grounds, which she most likely could have. Similarly, she refuses to go to town with Leonie to help her buy soap and towels, even though, as Leonie points out, she has a taste for it. In both cases, she's so absorbed in her self-deprecation that they both end up snapping at her for her unhelpful behaviour. Because of her issues, Marianne holds herself back from using her talents to help those who need her, or even bonding with those around her, to the point of frustrating her friends. At heart, she's a kind, sensitive, and capable person, but that's obscured by her hang-ups, a sadly realistic character flaw. Speaking of bonding, a key trend in Marianne's supports is that they're very one-sided towards her. Not only that, they almost all revolve around her support partners coming at her depression from their own unique angles, which simultaneously characterizes them by displaying the things most important to them. Another feather in Three Houses' already impressive characterizing cap, this style highlights different parts of Marianne's psyche and attitude, as well as showing the various avenues of her life that her depression hinders her in. Dimitri, a similarly sensitive and tortured soul, empathizes with Marianne's pain by sharing his own. He makes it clear that he understands how she feels, intimately describing the feeling of survivor's guilt. He's in fact the only one who touches on this with her. The two share a bond of guilt and pain which, in its own way, soothes them both. Their wounded hearts find each other, but this alone isn't enough to mend them, at least not yet. This highlights Marianne's survivor's guilt, trauma at the loss of her parents, and the scars she carries moving forward, which stymie her from bonding with others. Claude, the self-proclaimed embodiment of distrust, at first wants to know her secrets. With his sharp, perceptive mind, Claude perfectly encapsulates Marianne's strife almost offhandedly. That said, once Claude figures out Marianne's secret, he tacitly reveals his own, encouraging her to escape the shadow of her crest's reputation. Notably, Marianne's the only one he reveals this to, except Byleth. Oddly enough, Marianne's vulnerability seems to encourage those around her to reveal their own burdens and insecurities. I guess shy girl appeal is universal. Ultimately, their support displays the inherent burdens she feels from carrying her crest that stops her from living happily. Ferdinand von Eyre, the noblest of nobles, most explicitly discusses Marianne's place as a noble, as he doesn't see her demeanour as befitting her station, which sounds callous, but it's just a mismatch in their perception and places in life. Ferdinand's in a strong position mentally, and is almost overbearing in his noble zeal, while Marianne's resigned to her nobility, frustrated by it. Another burden. She spends so much emotional energy merely surviving and maintaining her basic noble duties that when Ferdinand suggests she do even more, it's a slap in the face, leading to a breakdown in communication. Their B support turns to the topic of purpose, which further compounds their contrast. Ferdinand's steadfast belief in living for his goals fortifies his heart through hardship. Marianne lacks this kind of faith and finds herself listless as a result. By contrasting her against another noble, whose only emotional hang-up is a superiority complex towards Edelgard, we see how Marianne's emotional issues, ironically including an inferiority complex, hold her back from living with purpose and excelling as a noble like he does. Similarly, Marianne compares herself to Ashe in their support, saying that she wants to have a dream to pursue in her life like he does, as she feels that'll lead to fulfillment, and calls her life empty without one. Ashe soundly rejects that idea, citing his previous life as an impoverished orphan who didn't have time to dream. Honestly, I agree with him. Even so, this support has Marianne admit a lack of drive, leading to a perceived lack of fulfillment. The resident crest expert, Linhart and Hanneman, directly tackle her crest, taking a more hands-on approach to the physiological root of her depression. Lin's more scientific in his approach, observing Marianne to verify her claims that her crest causes bad luck. Hanneman's more pastoral, trying to help her accept her crest and the inherent talent it gives her so she can train to use it properly. Marianne's initial denial to do this, and even claim that her crest has nothing to offer, yet again illustrates how her mindset towards her crest shuts down her development, and symbolizes her denial of her own talents. Marianne's issues come to a head with Lysithea, someone whose crest situation is even more dire. Their B support starkly contrasts Lysithea's fiery determination and tenacity with Marianne's defeatist attitude, which Lysithea rips her over. The 5 stages of grief is a common concept in psychiatry, those being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. In this paradigm, while Lysithea's reached the final stage, overcoming her grief and focusing on making the most of her time left, Marianne is clearly stuck in the depression stage, unable to find the light in the dark, and always giving up before she has a chance to try. All of this goes to show that Marianne's issues persistently limit her from realizing her potential, and I mean realize in both senses of the word. Lysithea and Ferdinand call her out for choosing to accentuate the negative of her situation and victimizing herself, and Claude notes that she isn't at least trying to shrug off her burdens so she can live well. In a sense, this is actually a lifeline. Unlike Lysithea, whose issue is primarily physical and largely out of her control, Marianne's key problems are her perception of her crest and herself, which she is fully capable of improving and even turning them into positives. But to get there, Marianne needs something she has a notable lack of: faith. That may sound surprising, as Marianne's notably religious. Dear Goddess is basically one of her catchphrases, along with I'm sorry and I have to go. Thing is, her approach to her religion is actually hurting her more than helping. In part 1, she shows a blind reliance on the goddess, constantly praying in supports or monastery conversations. Praying, but never doing. It's a mere crutch that not only distracts her from actively trying to improve her situation, but encourages her to hide away from others in the cathedral and focus on degrading herself. It's a psychological trap or pitfall that only worsens her mental state, as seen in her support with Ash, where she confesses to the goddess for everything about her, or with Ferdinand, where she asks the goddess why she cursed her with such suffering, and of course what we find out in her Byleth support, which we'll return to. The fact that, as the player, you know this is a fruitless endeavour demonstrates a toxicity born from the church's regime. That said, given her abject lack of faith in herself and her despair at her crest, it's unsurprising that Marianne would turn to a higher power for comfort, though whether it's actual faith or mere desperation is questionable. Either way, for her to truly grow and become the person she can be, Marianne needs to change the way that she looks at her religious faith and gain a different kind of faith. Faith in herself, her ability, and her friends. She needs to accept her situation and have the faith that she can learn to make the most of it, using her faith in the goddess as an asset to her own strength rather than a crutch. And Marianne has everything she needs to do it. A dozen hands reach out to her, she just needs to believe that she deserves to take them. But to get there, she needs help. But not the goddesses, as far as she knows, but rather Byleth's. Therefore, whether she sinks or swims is up to you. Marianne's character arc is oddly structured on closer inspection. She's extremely static in white clouds, unable to bring herself to develop more than slightly. But miraculously, she's a largely different person in part 2, even though you don't really see her change. It makes her character oddly stilted, but this facilitates the structure of her arc. Marianne's the only student that won't appear in part 2 if she isn't part of your army at the time skip, and there's a reason for that. You see, just like the house leaders, especially Edelgard and Dimitri, Marianne's destiny is in your hands. For better or worse, Byleth is someone with a seemingly irresistible charisma, and the uncanny ability to draw the best out of everyone around them. With that in mind, it's likely Marianne doesn't get the same level of support from the other Golden Deer if Byleth isn't around to guide them as well, and if she's not recruited, she'll never get to support the likes of Ferdinand or Ash. This makes Byleth's presence critical to her development, especially given what she says in their A support. Let's tackle the elephant in the room. During the conversation, set during part 2, Marianne reveals that she was in fact heavily suicidal during part 1, begging the goddess daily to take her life. If Byleth doesn't choose the Golden Deer or recruits Marianne, she gets what I call her bad future. She'll never get the chance to address the rumours of her crest in her Paralogue, but more critically, she and her classmates never receive Byleth's guidance, and thus she'll never be able to accept the support and compassion she so dearly needs from her peers. The best case scenario is that after part 1 she goes back home and is somehow able to pull herself together and move on in a new direction, or perhaps she disappears with Dorte like she does in her pre-time skip ending. But given her relatively static nature in part 1, the narrative emphasis Three Houses puts on Byleth's presence to the student's development, plus her actual desire to die, I think the likely conclusion is more dire. Marianne gives up. Her survivor's guilt keeps her from bonding with others. She stays crushed by her burdens. She never finds a purpose or dares to dream and stays unfulfilled. She continues to see her crest as a curse and never tries to make it her own. She never learns to find the light in the dark and remains bound by depression. She stays so deluded that this one part of her makes her unworthy of compassion and affection that she never learns to find strength in herself or her bonds. She never finds her faith. And without that, she silently carries on with her demons, and ultimately is overcome by them, never to be seen or heard from after leaving Garreg Mach. It's a tragic, but sadly realistic consequence. The flow of time leads Marianne down a path of pain, self-loathing, and ultimately, demise. Marianne doesn't have the will to face it, or change it, so instead chooses to end it. But what if she did have it? Should Byleth choose the Golden Deer or recruit Marianne during White Clouds? All of a sudden, the paradigm shifts. Marianne's present and accounted for, and thanks to the initial support she got in Part 1, it's clear things have improved. She's looking much healthier and pretty stylish. The glow-up isn't just external either, which Marianne shows off in her Paralogue. Here, we learn the truth of Maurice's crest. Marianne explains that Maurice was the original bearer of the crest of the beast. Originally a celebrated hero, the negative power of his crest and his hero relic, the Blutgang, transformed him into a demonic beast. Turns out those rumors weren't altogether wrong. Marauding the woods in the Edmund territory, the abomination that's now Maurice became known for killing anyone wandering into his path, eventually causing the people of Fodlan to grow to despise him, strip him of his honor, and attempt to cull his bloodline. This obviously didn't quite take, which Marianne is proof of. A crest scholar with some knowledge on Maurice's crest hounds Marianne, believing her to be the rumored beast. Up till now, the only one we've seen truly give Marianne grief for her crest was her. Now she's being actively accused of the worst, with no proof it's not true. Marianne's essentially being confronted with her biggest fear. And what does she do? Well, she conquers it. With the help of Byleth and her friends, Marianne tracks down, fights, and defeats Maurice, freeing him of a millennium of suffering, and obtains the Blutgang, an indisputable receipt of her crest, and the fact that she isn't the rumored beast. Not to mention, she also saves not only anyone else in Fodlan with Maurice's crest, but every following generation bearing the crest from living through what she did. After this, she stops hiding her crest in gameplay, showing that she now accepts it. Through this paralogue, Marianne, by her own hand, lifts her curse. She proves to the world, and herself, that she's not defined by the history of her crest. She is who she is. But what if I told you this almost doesn't matter? The catharsis of Marianne dispelling her crest's mystery and affirming herself is really just the icing on the cake of her arc. Her defeating the literal embodiment of her demons with the help of her friends is symbolic of the growth she undergoes thanks to them. But that's the thing. Whether or not she gets the closure of her paralogue, Marianne is going to have that growth and overcome her issues anyway, as long as they're around, because her crest wasn't truly the issue, at least not on a day-to-day basis. The problem was internal. Do you think Marianne would have had the guts to try this in Part 1? I don't, and thematically, she shouldn't. She hasn't properly received the support of her friends by this point. This happening in Part 1 would defy the symbolism of her triumphing over her fears with them. To even be able to try, she needs to join Byleth. In joining forces with Byleth, Marianne gets her good future. She not only benefits from Byleth's guidance, but thanks to Byleth's magnetic charisma, she gets the support of her friends that have also been able to grow because of them. Just as Marianne's early supports display how her depression holds her back, her later supports show her taking valuable lessons to heart from her support partners and growing in every avenue. From Dimitri, she learns that she needn't force herself to smile as her soul bleeds, but that she can't give up on her precious life. Conversely, Sylvain teaches her that a person's value is in their smile, which is honestly pretty terrible advice, but at least it seems to help. From Claude, she learns that while we all have our burdens, some even from birth, we have the choice to live with them or cast them aside, and gains the courage to try and release hers, which, should you do her paralogue, is a total success. With Ferdinand, she finds purpose in helping people and making them happy, and from Ash she learns that just because she doesn't have a specific dream yet, that doesn't make her life meaningless. Leonie and Lawrence help her become more comfortable with her personality, with Leonie encouraging her to connect with people, even if just a little, while Lysithea urges her to find the light in the dark and not give in to despair. With Ignatz, she finds someone with a similar lack of self-confidence who can easily relate to and accept her personality quirks and learns to grow in the same way he found, by finding the strength to look up, so she can engage with other people and the beauty of the world. With Hanneman, she finds a mentor to help her harness her crest's full power, which symbolizes her learning to acknowledge and capitalize on her many talents. And Hilda, well, Hilda's kind of just the best. Unlike her other support partners, Hilda doesn't actively push Marianne to grow. She merely offers her companionship and a reason to smile, while taking her blunders and personality quirks in stride. Besides being totally on brand for Hilda, this is honestly the best thing she can do for her. I was kidding when I mentioned Marianne's vulnerability, but it's a genuinely endearing personality trait, and one that only serves to make her bonds stronger. Hilda herself notes that Marianne inspires her to try much harder than usual, and that vulnerability is surely why. Finally, with Byleth, she reflects on where she started and where she's arrived.
Professor, you're always watching over me, aren't you? I've spent my entire life avoiding people. Speaking to others was so difficult for me, so I made a point to always be alone. Animals and the goddess were the only ones I could really open up to. Do you remember the time you asked what it was I prayed for? Yes, but that wasn't the case. Back then, I felt that my life served no purpose and that I was nothing more than a burden. In truth, I was begging the goddess to take me to her. That was my daily prayer. But now I fear the idea of dying and being left alone. I have friends who accept me for who I am now, in spite of my crest. And I have you watching over me. I finally learned to accept the kindness and warmth of others. It's because of you, Professor. Because of you, I've decided to live.
Marianne finally realizes that she has people who genuinely care for and support her, and learns to believe in the friends that believe in her. This is the faith she really needed all along. Speaking of, her attitude towards religion even changes. She no longer clings to prayers to end her suffering. Now, her religious faith is a mere bolster to her personal faith that she draws her now impressive personal strength from. Strength enough to cast off her veil of self-loathing and dispel the curse of her crest. She isn't perfect, mind you. She still stumbles, even in her A supports, but now she has support to stop her from falling. And you know what? In a way, even the goddess really was there for her after all, and guided her to salvation, not in the way she expected or asked for, but by way of Byleth, who carries Sophis' power. Her religious faith was actually rewarded in a sense, with the one carrying the goddess's power choosing to believe in her. Even so, her growth is only realized with effort and self-belief on her part. Ironically, Marianne might be the only one better off from the war. The war acts as a sort of wake-up call, a primal trigger to her sense of survival and a view to what death actually means, which makes her realize how valuable her life really is and forces her to focus on surviving. Wartime also forces Marianne to spend a lot of time with her peers. Combined with this wake-up call I mentioned, this gives her the chance, and more importantly, the inclination to bolster all these connections and that support she might not otherwise have been able to. Nothing showcases Marianne's personal growth better than her S support.
I apologize for chasing after you. I really need to speak with you, but I can come back if now is not a good time. Thank you. You've always been so accepting of me. You've never rejected me for my flaws. You have given me the strength and courage to look forward to my future. But I won't know what to do with myself when the war has ended. Apparently, I'm being hailed as a hero back home. Can you imagine that? Me, a hero. And now my family wants me by their side so they can flaunt my new status about town. How silly. No. I've been considering what would be the best course for my future, and... Well, here, please, won't you take this? I'm sorry for surprising you with this so suddenly. In truth, I've surprised even myself. It's unthinkable that someone who spent their entire life avoiding people could offer you a ring. But who I am now? It's all thanks to you. You've shown me a strength I didn't know I could possess. I wanted you to see how far I've come, and how much I've grown. I guess I wanted you to see me show a little bravery. I'm not asking you to marry me here and now. That would be a bit much, perhaps. Maybe we can just think of this as a promise that you will always be in my heart.
Marianne's one of the few female characters to confess to Byleth first, with a ring no less. Marianne of all people, even Thunderstrike Cassandra had to finesse that one. This shows just how much bolder she's got, and that she has the confidence to reach out for what she wants now, and actively deepen her relationships. If her Paralogue is the icing on the cake of her arc, then this is the sprinkles on top. A perfect cap-off to her character arc. Even in her endings, Marianne reverses her issues with speaking, becoming an accomplished orator and politician. A far cry from the girl who treated conversations like grenades. Marianne's story shines a light on the dark side of Fodlan's crest culture, and demonstrates an unexpected consequence of the Church's doctrine. At the same time, it's a commentary on the perennial and pernicious nature of emotional illness, and the value of a strong support system, both kinds. Faith can mean many things. It can be belief in a higher power, but faith in oneself and the bonds we form is a power all its own, that can change lives and work miracles. With the faith she finds in herself, the faith of her friends, and even the faith of the goddess, Marianne's able to literally and figuratively overcome her demons.